Welcome to Cafe Grit. My name is Beth Campbell, and I am the author of Where the Hell is My Bacon?, a book about a corporate team that triumphed over shitty leadership with the help of fried pork. I open Cafe Grit as a place where you can join me in figuring out how to channel your grit and find your voice in the world, whatever that means for you. This is the place to go when you've got the hankering for purpose, the taste for fulfillment, and you're tired of living the rat race. Thanks for stopping in. Cafe Grit is now open for service. Hey everybody, welcome to Cafe Grit. I'm your host, Beth Campbell. Cafe Grit is the place where the moxie is fresh, the passion cold brewed, and everything is served with a heaping side of mojo. Today, I have a special guest in the grit seat. I will be talking with Mike Wesolowski. He is the author of The Broken Spoke, which is the true story of his journey from child abuse through addiction to finally facing his childhood trauma and getting sober. Mike is my uncle. He's my father's brother, and I helped him put this book together. So I'm going to give you a brief summary of the book to set us up, because the ride we take in this podcast is not going to be sequential, and we're not going to give all of the details for the book. We would be here for hours. So I'll also caution that there are parts of Mike's story that may be difficult to hear, maybe even triggering. So please be aware and adjust your watching or listening experience, especially if you or people around you have been abused or gone through substance addiction. So just take a precaution. So here's a little summary of the book. Mike was physically and verbally abused by both of his parents and sexually abused by his father for many years, from as early as he can remember. The sexual abuse went on until he was around 9 or 10. The physical and verbal abuse were continued for a few years after that. In 1981, Mike's father, my grandfather, died, and he kind of spiraled. He was 16 at the time, spiraled into a lot of self-destructive behaviors, mostly to cope with the childhood events. Then in the mid-'80s, he met his now wife, Marcia, and eventually they moved out of Michigan, where they lived and where Mike had been born and raised. And Mike spent the next 15 years managing farms in the Midwest, and during this time, he was completely sober for 15 years. So then in 2006, Mike and his wife moved to the Pacific Northwest, and their children had all graduated from high school, moved on to adulthood. So they decided to make this move. And it was around this time, I think, that Mike started to process the abuse from his childhood. And with that came alcohol addiction. And his alcoholism continued for the next almost 10 years until he finally faced his past and got sober. So at various times in his life, Mike used bicycles and biking as mechanisms for coping with the reality of his past. And then once he got sober, the bike became more of a tool to help him heal. Mike asked me to help him put his story together a few years ago. And I know it's been a difficult but healing journey for him. I had no idea that a lot of this was happening, any of this was happening before that. And it was difficult to hear the horrible things that my uncle went through. But several years now after we started our collaboration, I'm now very close to an uncle that I barely knew for 50 years. And I'm so proud of him and the man that he has become today. You would not believe the changes that he's gone through, even just since he started writing this book. So it is my pleasure and my pride to bring you this conversation with my uncle, Mike Wesolowski, author of The Broken Spoke. Mike, I want you to go back to the time when you decided to start writing The Broken Spoke. So talk to me a little bit about, like, what's the thought process at the time? How long ago did you start writing this, by the way?
It was about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, and I was working with a therapist, Tom, who suggested that I start journaling. And the reason being is that the perpetrators from my childhood were all deceased, and so I could not confront them. And so he thought it would be helpful for my healing. And so I just started journaling every day. And then, I got like a year into it or so, and had a pretty good body of work, was making some good progress on my healing and facing my demons. And then, life happens. I had a serious bike accident that literally killed me. And so that was life altering, and so I just kept journaling, and, other life events happened, and you just keep going. And next thing you know, there's this body of work that it was more like a series of short stories in a shotgun blast with no organization. And then my wonderful niece Beth, who's also my publisher, editor, and all around badass, she found out about it and said, "Hey, I want to take a look at it. There might be something here for a book." And I was very humble and like, "No, nobody's
So
going to
it
want to
was
hear me."
really me. So I was just going to ask you, like, at what point do you decide, okay, this is journaling into book? I didn't even realize that I even had a part
Oh
in
yeah,
that. I don't remember. Oh, wow.
because I was
Go
like, I got this
me.
body of work and it could be something, but I have no clue how to edit and I'm no grammar expert. And so I just kind of like threw my hands up and said, "Oh well, it'll be there." And then I don't even know how you and I got together on that dialogue, but then I handed you the body of work and you said, "Yeah, we can do this." And then it was just the back and forth editing process, and we worked through COVID and all that shit.
Yeah, yeah. Online meetings are amazing.
Yeah.
Do you so when you started writing this, if it's 8 years ago, you would have been in the fairly beginning of your sobriety. So
Oh yeah.
was it difficult when you first started to do that journaling? Did
It was difficult, but it was also therapeutic,
Yeah.
because I felt like going up to that, I always felt like I was the only one, like I was alone. And then I started to realize through therapy and journaling that I wasn't alone, that there were a lot of other people with a similar story. And then when I had the bad crash in 2016, the bike crash, that was like concussion number 9 that had left me unconscious. And it did a
Wait, let's
lot
repeat
of brain.
that for anybody. That's number nine that you know of, right? You might have even had
Well,
more than
no,
that.
let me clarify. So in my life, I can recount approximately 2 dozen concussions.
Oh my God.
In that 2 dozen concussions, I can accurately account for 9 times where I was rendered unconscious.
Mm,
For how long? I don't know. Could have been a couple seconds, could have been a couple minutes. When you're in that space, you have no idea. And unless
yeah.
somebody is there to witness it, which most people were not, they cannot tell you how long you were unconscious.
Yeah.
But it's irrelevant as to the length of the unconsciousness because it does damage to the brain that most times is unrepairable.
Yeah.
It's just a permanent problem. And so after that 2016 crash, which actually took me 3 years to get out of the brain fog, um, there were a lot of times of depression there where I felt like I was the only one in the world that had this issue. And, it's like finally I kind of came to this place where I'm like, life is hard and sometimes it sucks and you just got to get through it. And I kept trying to push forward and I was trying all kinds of things, nootropics and different kind of, off the mainstream treatments. And I was making progress, but man, was it slow. Talk about aggregate marginal gains. Yeah, that was it. And
I mean,
so to go back to it, yes, it was therapeutic, but it was also hard.
yeah. When you were writing in those early days, I know you and I have talked personally a lot about the fact that you compartmentalized a lot of stuff that if someone safe would have asked you about, did your dad ever hit you or whatever, you would, of course, you would have memory of that, but a lot of it was really pushed back. Did you have anything that came out that you remembered over the course of the several years that you were actively writing in the
Oh
book?
yeah, there was a lot of memories that surfaced, and it was so random, and that's why I talk about in the Broken Spoke that healing is not linear and it happens on its
Yeah.
own terms. And there would be times where not just in the journaling, but I think that was a piece of it. Is maybe I'd journal about something, and then maybe I'd go to a bakery. This actually happened. I went to a bakery, and the aroma triggered a memory that I had of going
Wow.
to a bakery with Mary when I was very young,
Your
and it
mom,
was
yeah,
at
your
the
mother, yeah.
bakery. And so I just suddenly had this visual of, oh yeah, I was in this bakery, and the aroma and the just the food. Like, when you're a kid, you want all the donuts, right? And that's what it was like. And I was like, wow,
You
that
know I
was
did, Mike. You know I wanted all the donuts.
right. We all did. I
I still
still
do.
do. Donuts with
Smells
sprinkles, please.
Smells are so powerful. Even, you and I have talked a lot about mindset work, and I incorporate smells. Even just recently, I've just had the power of all of our senses when we're doing things like visualization or goal work, and because smells are powerful. So it's
Yeah,
very
they are.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. So, the book is called The Broken Spoke, and of course, there is a lot of bicycle elements. And one of the first images that we have in the book is when you were very, very young, probably 3 or 4 years old, and it was your mother, Mary. We'll refer to her as Mary. There was an incident where you got in trouble, and she took your bike and threw it out, and lit it on fire out in your trash pile. Do you what tell me what memories you have of that time and that incident and how that kind of made you feel as a 3 or 4 year old, as much as you can remember.
Sure. Yeah. Well, going back to the actual incident that triggered her response, I was just being a typical 3-year-old kid, and I was just fucking around like kids do. And I'll admit that I probably had ADHD as a kid, and I probably was a little hard to handle sometimes, but so what? you know,
Who wasn't?
called parenthood, right?
Right.
But I remember, running over my cousin's toe, and then Mary yanked me off the tricycle by my ear, and she snatched it up, and I remember her dragging me out to the door in one hand by my ear and having the tricycle in her other hand. And I didn't know what we were doing. I was just, going out there towards the burn pit. And then I think she was saying something, but I wasn't processing. I was more processing what I was seeing. Like, what are we doing here? I was really kind of confused. And then she tossed my bike in the burn pit, which was fairly large. It was probably like 6 feet across. And then she always kept a can of charcoal lighter fluid next to the burn pit, and she just doused the bike heavily with the lighter fluid. And then she always wore an apron, like everywhere around the house. She always wore an apron, and she had a box of wooden kitchen matches in her apron. And she just reached in the pocket and pulled it out and struck it and tossed it on there, and it just went woof. And I remember thinking, oh man, that's really fucked up. My bike's getting burned up. And I just remember standing there watching it, like in shock, like numb. And the paint started to bubble up and the tires started to melt. And I'm thinking, man, I'm never gonna be able to ride that bike again. That really sucks. But it was like in the moment, I wasn't thinking like, when am I getting my new bike or anything? It was like, wow, that was fucking harsh. And I think that was like the first lesson that I remember of like action and consequences, and like you can't do things without consequences. And that was a fucking extreme hard lesson.
Yeah.
But it's just, I don't know, man. It's like I was numb. I was just
Was
pretty numb.
what was her demeanor? Was she when she would do things like that, was she, or at least in this particular instance, was she like visibly, audibly enraged, or was it more just like silent rage or
And so the initial reaction was always pretty much the same, like just this outburst of I'm pissed, the verbal, the language, and the it was a lot of what you call like hurtful language,
yeah.
like name calling, you son
Mike,
of
you
a bitch.
son of a bitch. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and even far worse. And then that would last maybe like 30 seconds or a minute, and then it would be this calm, just anger, like, "I'm gonna show you," and then
Yeah.
that's when the things would start. And what's crazy is, like, as pissed as Mary would get, there were not a lot of times when I got a beat down from Mary.
Yeah.
There were a couple of times where she lost it and I got a beat down, but for the most part, it was always this verbal outburst of it, just this outrage, just like, oh shit, she's gonna kill me, but there was nothing physical. And then it would just simmer until Ray, my father, got home, and then I would get the beat down.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk in the book about the severity of his punishment, abuse. Let's just call it what it is, abuse. I want to just talk a little bit, just wrap up too, because you had when you and I talked about this incident that's really starts the book off. We talk a little bit about your crash of 2016, but then kind of kicking off your childhood. You kind of when you explained it to me, it almost sounded like yeah, like yes, you had a reaction, but it was almost like the beginning of that detachment that you
Hmm.
have talked about. Is that so let's talk I want to talk just a little bit about that detachment because you have you and I have talked a lot about that about I just alluded to it a little bit earlier about how you kind of were aware, but it was so far in the back of your mind. But you've also talked about the detachment being carried into your adult life, where
Sure.
you pull in that separation, that calmness, almost like you're out of yourself.
Yeah.
Is that still? Are you still? You still pull in that
Oh yeah.
detachment?
Yeah, yeah, especially under stressful situations, like, if there's um, I don't know, I'll use an example. I'm out in public and there's some sort of chaos that breaks out. Like, maybe there's an altercation between two people that I'm not even remotely involved in, but I'm aware of it because it's within my sphere of view and, it's in my space. And that's when things like slow down. And so then almost tunnel vision, like I can see the situation and I can process what's happening and I'm aware of what else is going on, but not really focused on it. And
Yeah,
it's like, okay, now I feel like I'm detaching myself from everything else and I'm focused on this one thing and I'll make good decisions. And it's kind of like I've heard various people use a similar analogy of that. And I don't know if it's from my childhood, probably, or at least a bias from that.
yeah,
But yeah, in it could be a work environment, there's chaos and everything's moving in every different direction. And I'm able to just sort it out quickly and say, here it is, here's the situation and the problem, and here's a potential solution.
yeah. And also that you've talked about that, being able to also separate yourself from whether you're eventually finding a solution or just like you've talked about when you were racing bikes where you would just kind of everything's not there. You're just sort of
Yeah.
compartmentalizing,
And
which is
it takes
fascinating.
out the emotion. Like, and I can give you another quick example. I was riding home from work one day. I commute on my bike whenever I can. Um, Actually, over 150 days a year, which is pretty awesome in the
That's awesome.
Pacific. But I was riding home from work and I take the same route, came around this corner, and there's a guy on a bike that had been hit by a car and he's laying on the pavement, like literally hit by the car seconds before I rolled up there.
Wow.
And he was kind of flopping around. He was clipped in, and he was trying to get up, and he was struggling. And the car was kind of over the top of him, and the driver of the car was standing there looking at him like she didn't know what to do. And I didn't even think. I just immediately stopped and I got off my bike and I went over to him and I calmed him down and I said, just relax, man. We'll get you sorted out. And it was like I was detached from everything else. I knew there were other people around. I knew that we had a situation, and I just evaluated it like, okay, calm down, breathe, no blood, any broken bones, how you feel, and that kind of thing, and just brought calmness to the situation. But it was very slow motion. And, then, we obviously called the police and got the ambulance and all that stuff. But in that moment, it was like, I wasn't me kneeling beside the guy. I was like above this all, taking it all in, but processing the problem.
Right. It's really amazing to me. One of the most amazing things about, from my perspective, about working with you on this journey, and also one of the hardest things, is how you talk about the things from your this horrific childhood that you had that play into who you are today in a positive manner. Not that you would ever wish anything on any child, but that it happened and that you
Yep.
have to take this. And that was hard for me to hear things like, look, this happened to me and it was horrible, but it made me who I am today. And I love who you are today. So it's just, I do find it really, for anybody out there who, because I know that there are other people who have been in traumatic situations who probably are conflicted about the same thing. Like, why do I, I like the person I am today, or I'm, these things that I think are helping me, or have helped me, came from such a horrific experience. And I hope anybody who's listening does not, beat themselves up for that at all. That is, because it was hard for me to hear but now it makes perfect sense. And, it just, as they say, it is what it is. So,
You talk about beat yourself up, and I am like the master of that. And I've gotten better as I've gotten older, but I am my own worst critic. I am so hard on myself for shit that really doesn't even matter. And it's caused me a lot of grief over my life,
yeah,
and I'm better at it now, and things, are a little smoother, but I still sometimes feel myself drifting into that space.
yeah,
And one thing that I've learned about me that I like, I don't want to say I relish it, but I certainly embrace it, is if it's hard, it's good. So what I mean by that is like when I'm training or racing or even riding, sometimes I want to be with others who are better than I am so that they punish me and make me suffer, which brings me to another level
mm,
of strength and fitness and,
yeah,
achieve a better, higher success. But not very many people will embrace that suffer. Not very many people will go back for more of that pain. And I really think that was founded in my childhood. It's like, okay, so this is my life every day. Fine, I'll take it. Let's do this and get it done. And I'll go play Lincoln Logs or whatever,
yeah.
and so it's like as an adult, I just went on a ride yesterday. There's a new crew that I got connected with out of Kirkland. Some former pro riders, some up and comer pro riders that they're trying to get developed to get into the pro circuit. So I'm riding with guys from early 20s all the way to 60. And when you race professionally, you forget more about riding than I will ever know in my life. So it's an education every time I get on the bike with those guys. And they just thrash me and I love it. And I'll go back again next week because I'm stronger today than I was yesterday because I rode with them.
Amen to that. You talked in the book also about kind of playing into that sort of mentality of the expectation from your parents that you could never achieve, like it was never good enough, whatever grade you got, and you were, being berated and you were the little devil. Does that still play into your adult life today where you strive for that perfection or just push and push and pushing? I already know the answer to this, but
Yeah, short answer is yes, obviously, but long answer is yes, but I have tempered that. So I've
why?
come to realize that perfection is mostly unattainable. I mean, you can, and I talk about this in the Broken Spoke, that you can achieve perfection in certain things for a brief period of time. But beyond that, it's just not attainable. And
Yeah.
you'll beat yourself up needlessly trying to achieve what you perceive or someone else perceives as perfection. And it's fleeting. It won't be there day in and day out. What I strive more for now is excellence. So, you know, do I have a perfect day at work? No. Was I as good as I could be? Yes. Good. Excuse me. Maybe not perfection, but excellence. So, there's perspective and how you look at it. Maybe that excellence is perfection, but if you change your mindset about it, it stops beating you up. It stops obsessing. it makes life a lot easier, a lot better. You know? I don't
Do
know
you
about
feel
easy. It makes it better.
you get stronger? It never gets easy. You just get stronger, right?
Amen to that. Yeah,
Yes.
and that's where that mantra came from. It's like whatever you're doing, mental, physical, you know, even if I achieve whatever physical goal I wanted to, it wasn't easy. And tomorrow I've got to beat that goal because that's how I'm wired. And some people have said, well, hey man, doing that event or racing that race, that must have been really hard. I'm like, no, that was okay. It was the years of training before that that was really
Yeah.
fucking hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all those early mornings and sacrifice and just destroying my body. That was fucking hard.
Yeah.
But the race, that was fun.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're at a place now where you can celebrate those little wins if it's not perfection,
Yeah.
but it's which is a great lesson for anybody
Yeah.
out there. So you had this horrible childhood. You endured a lot of stuff that is just you talk about in the book, and then at some point, and then you when your father when Ray your father died, you kind of spiraled and got into some drugs and alcohol and some other self-destructive behavior, and then you met your wife Marcia,
Mhm.
who is awesome. How did that I know it took a few years, but how did that change your perspective on, what was going on in life back then?
Yeah. Well, it was more gradual. Like she took the edge off me, and she never tried to control me. I think that was the big thing, the
Yeah,
key piece that like, yeah, she'd watch me drink to blackout and go off the rails, but she never said, no, don't do it. She was just there, and you know, it was like she wasn't trying to control my actions, which made it easier for me to just be part of her world. And then, of course, she had two kids by her first marriage. So I was their father role model
right.
just as it all played out. And I was aware that I needed to be there for them. So, if I was blackout drunk and hungover all the time, I wasn't. I wasn't there for them. And so, it kind of evolved over time that the responsibility that was given to me as an opportunity, I needed to step up, and I would still drink, I still did dumb stuff, but it was like it was an evolution, I mean, like I talk about on the Broken Spoke, I didn't become an alcoholic in one day. I didn't stop, overnight.
Right.
It was like, sure, I may have stopped drinking, but my healing took years.
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
but it was like, and Marcia and I, when we first met, our relationship was purely physical, like not just the sexual, but the emotional wasn't there. The emotion was we're in the moment, we like each other. That's the relationship. And then eventually, pretty quickly actually, it kind of evolved to, okay, we might be able to spend the rest of our lives together, but neither one of us were ready to make that commitment yet.
Yeah.
And then time goes on, and we grew into it.
So you met Marcia, things start to settle a little bit, and then in I think it was 91, you all made the decision to
Yep.
leave Michigan, and you spent the next 15 years in the
Yep.
Midwest. Every few years, you were managing farms and doing other things. Why did you decide to leave Michigan? What was it about? What was that decision? Where did that come from?
At the moment, it was a job. In reflection, I was trapped. I was running from my past, and I wasn't facing it. And so that's why, like, as I look back, in that 15-year span, we moved on average every few years, about every 3 years. But the reason wasn't for another job, which was the reason that I was always using. Oh, it's a better job, it's a better opportunity, it's more money. No, that was bullshit. It was just an excuse. The real reason that I was moving is I was running from my past and I wasn't facing it. And so I was trying to fulfill what I felt was what my father Ray had really would have wanted for me, because he loved his farming, he loved his cattle, he ran the dry cleaners. That was his money maker, so to speak, so that he could have these hobbies of farming. And so I was subconsciously always trying to fulfill what he wanted. And then I just
Fascinating.
finally got to the point where I'm like, it doesn't fucking matter. What matters is what I want. And so then there was a lot of soul searching. Whew. And I figured it out.
Yeah,
I
that's
just,
awesome.
I
It's
just
really
wanted,
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me too. And again, anybody who's been through something similar, it's another one of those things to not beat yourself. Even after all you went through, you still had this paradigm, as we talked about earlier, in our private conversation, paradigm, your belief, your subconscious was still thinking, well, I've got to do what I'm supposed to do because that's what my dad did. And yeah, it's just amazing. So, you had well, I just love this story because you talk about your dream of Seattle. And so you're all around the Midwest. You're finally, but you have this, and your kids are in school, so that I know that was a part of it, right?
yeah,
Marcia, and you just said, okay, we're not going to move again. You settled for I think 6 years in Minnesota,
yep,
but you had this dream that even started before you even visited the Pacific Northwest, which I think is just a real like cool
yeah,
universe moment. So can you tell
yep.
me a little bit about where that dream came from and some of the little elements that you've told me about that were kind of
It
woo?
was just, it grew. I mean, I can remember sketching like just in a notepad doodle. I was just doodling, right? I'm at work and I'm waiting for this or that to get done so I can go on to the next job. And I always had a little notepad and pen that I'd make notes about things I had to do. And I would just sketch this stuff. And the sketch was always the same. It was a mountain scene with evergreens. And it was like, where did it come from? I don't
Yeah.
know. I can remember being in my early mid 20s and making that sketch. And then this was way back in like 91. I can remember doing that.
And
And
anybody
I'd
who's
never,
from Michigan, we don't have there's
no,
no where we grew up, where Mike and I grew up, there are not mountains. I mean, there are
no,
evergreens, but it's not like it's completely different terrain.
not
So it's
like
not like yeah.
Yeah, and I had never even visited the mountains. Like I had never been to the mountains in the east,
Yeah.
So the only vision of mountains that I had was what I see on TV or a magazine picture or whatever. And then it was like it just kept recurring. And then fast forward like I don't know, I was probably early 30s and I sketched out that same thing, which I've been doing all along. And I'm not an artist either. Let's be real. I am a horrible artist. And I sketched it out and I gave it to a tattoo artist and said, "Hey, can do something with this and make it cool?" And she did. She drew a mountain scene with the sunrise coming up, and I had it tattooed on my calf. And it was like, that's where I want to live, and I didn't think about it at the moment. I didn't think like, oh, I'm going to live there. No, it was just there and it made me feel good. And then we when I lived in Minnesota, I actually had a postcard and I have no idea where it came from. Don't know who sent it, whatever. But it was this mountain scene and I had it on the wall in front of my desk. And so I'd see it every day when I was doing my paperwork. And it was just like it evolved. And then when our middle son graduated high school, he wanted to go to Seattle for his senior trip, like, graduation present,
Yeah.
whatever. And he was really into grunge rock. So he wanted to see where it all began with Nirvana and, Kurt Cobain and all that.
Sure.
And so Marcia and I were like, all right, let's pack up the family and we'll make it a camping trip going out there. And so we went along the Highline Road, Highway 2, up along the Canadian border. And we just drove and then we'd camp every day. And we finally made it to Seattle. And I just remember the views of the mountains were just breathtaking, and even still now I've lived here for 17 years. And I still I'll be driving and I'll be like, wow, this mountain scene is freaking amazing because it's crazy. Like on a summer day, like now it's clear and it's sunny. You look and there's the Olympic range, and you look and there's the Cascade range, and you look and there's Mount Rainier, and it's all right there in that spot. It's not like you have to travel an hour to go see those different things.
Yeah.
You can see all of those in one moment. And it's like going back to where I started my sketch. That's it.
Yeah. I love it. It's like it's very serendipitous woo and just like people talk about they go to a place and they're like this is they feel this is where they should be. It's like you knew
Yeah.
that years
Yep.
before and I love it. So
Yeah, as soon as I got to Seattle, like, we stopped, got out of the car, and I remember we were downtown by the Needle and just exploring. And I was looking at the people, and they're, kind of like hippies and, grunge rockers and all that. And I fit in. I was like, wow, these are my people. I get where they're at, right?
yeah.
They're not conforming. They're just doing their own thing. They're not bothering anyone, and they're happy. I'm like, fuck yeah. That's all.
So you just before you moved to the Pacific Northwest, you and Marcia were had been traveling around 15 years, and during this time you are 100% sober, right?
Yes. Yep.
Right. So you're not, and
Nothing.
then
Not
not a
no
thing.
marijuana. Nothing. I mean, like, I didn't even take over the counter painkillers.
Right. And then you talk in the book about this one moment at your youngest son Ray's graduation where you have a drink with him. He's about to go off into the army and boot camp and you took a drink. Can you talk a little bit about that moment and what door was open for you for that and what that meant?
So we were at Ray's graduation party, and he had already joined the army, and he was leaving for boot camp like the next week. And one of his buddies from high school, he'd also joined. They actually both joined together. And this is when the war in Iraq was going on, and I
Yeah.
already had one son in the military. We all knew where Ray was going to end up. He's going to be in the sandbox. And so I felt like I wanted to have a drink with my son, and I knew I was approaching a line that I may cross. And I knew, like, kind of subconsciously, I knew that I could be making a really bad decision here, but it was it wasn't enough to dissuade me from having that drink with him. So, I had a drink with him, and Marcia looked at me like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got this." Thinking, and really, I'm not sure I got this, but we're gonna do it. And then, it was the one drink, and I remember it burned my throat, and it didn't taste that good. And then,
Yeah, and
I
it
just
wasn't
kind of
like instant relapse either, right? You
no,
talk about like it's not like it was okay, I took this drink and all of a sudden the next day I'm, blacking out. You
no,
didn't you
no,
didn't
it's
drink
not.
again then for a little period of time, right? And then it
Yeah,
was
I would say it was probably a couple of months because we left Minnesota shortly after, like within a week of when Ray graduated, and he left for basic. About a week later, we moved, and then we kind of bounced around the Pacific Northwest for a minute, just exploring, sightseeing. We're kind of killing time waiting for Ray to graduate basic training, and then that happened in August, and we had left in mid June, left Minnesota. And so we went, and, in that whole time I was sober.
yeah.
And then we went to his basic training graduation, which was amazing. And then we immediately went to Brazil, and we traveled abroad for 3 months. And that's where it really started to creep in because not making any excuses,
They like to
the,
party, the Brazilian.
the they will party for anything and nothing whenever, and it's just that environment. And of course, I had let my guard down. I was between jobs. I had nobody to answer to but myself. And so, yeah, I had a few drinks, and I liked the feeling. And they got this stuff called cachaça, which is basically moonshine. and then they make it into a drink called caipirinha, which
Mm.
is basically a mixed drink with sugar and lime and cachaça, and it's really freaking good.
Yeah.
They
Well, I
will also
imagine
be drunk.
Well, I imagine at this time too, because now you've got your kids are off, and of course there's stress there, but you're also traveling. You're not concentrating on intense job. You've got
Right.
other concentrations, but I would also imagine just because of where you are in your life and your age at that point, that things are starting to swirl about your past. Is that a fair statement?
Not initially, but you're onto something there with where I was at in my life. So you got to remember that when Ray left home to go to the army, that was the first time in my life with Marcia that we had been empty nesters.
Yeah,
So, traditionally you meet a woman or you meet a spouse and you're together, then you build a family. Whereas with us, we met and we decided to be a couple, and then we had a family all through that, right?
right.
Because our two oldest sons, and then when of course they were already moved out of the house, and then when Ray left, we're Marcia and I were looking at each other like, okay, it's just us now. We can do anything because we have no children to be responsible for.
Right.
They're adults now, and so that freedom was something that I was experimenting with and sensing and just learning to grow with. And part of that, not having a job at the moment, that allowed me even more freedom because there's no commitment. I got to be to work tomorrow morning. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a lot easier to just be free. And there were a lot of days in Brazil where we'd go sit on the beach all day and we
Yeah.
just soak up the sun and eat the food and living the good life. But then that got boring too. As hard as it is to believe, for me, that got boring. I was like, all right, let's go do stuff, because
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
But
doing a lot of stuff is distraction too, and I think that's
yeah,
we've talked about you and I have talked about that quite a bit.
yeah,
So you come back from Brazil, you end up get moving to the Pacific Northwest. You get settled in, you got a kind of a new career kicking off, and then for the next 10 years almost, you kind of start falling deeper and deeper into alcoholism and to the adrenaline.
right.
And you also start kind of ramping up the bike
Mhm.
activity, right? So you mountain biked for quite a bit and then you got into road racing and then track racing. So talk to me a little bit about what the bike represented during your that addiction period during that, where you were actively in into drinking quite heavily. How did that play into coping? I mean, was that a part of
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. The bike was a definite coping mechanism. It allowed me to trash my body and like let go of this rage. I had a lot of rage in me at that time in my life. It was like, and looking back, I had it throughout my adulthood, but it was really starting to surface in my early 40s and carried on even into my early 50s. And so I was able to just beat up my body and beat up the bike, which gave me an outlet. And then what I didn't know at the time, but I've learned since then, is that when you do intense cardio, you get an endorphin dump in your brain, which mimics the feeling you get, the euphoric feeling when you drink alcohol. And so it was like I was now feeling that emotion without the drinking, but still getting that bump that I needed. But then I would also drink too. So it was like now I had a 24-hour, endorphin dump, this pleasure dump that I didn't have to have a hangover with because I was only drinking a portion of that. And
right?
even then, when I was drinking, I rarely got hungover. And it's because I drank clean vodka. And anybody who's an alcoholic knows that clean vodka is less likely to give you a hangover. And I'd figured that out pretty early, which was not a good thing.
Yeah. So for almost a decade, then your addiction picked back up, and you talk in the book in detail about the on and off.
Yeah.
So then in on February 15th, 2015, you're almost at 10 years. This is awesome. What were
That's my
some of
birthday.
the what were some of the factors that kind of led to your making the decision? Because I know it wasn't just a bang moment, but tell me what are some of the things that were in your head about making you decide, all right, this is it. I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had come off a series of hard benders. And when I say hard benders, I mean blackout drinking and, just not knowing what I did. And luckily for me, I didn't do anything majorly stupid. It was just this not knowing. And um, everything outside of that was awesome in my life. I had a great career, great marriage, great family. I was physically strong. And I just was like poisoning myself. I was drinking so much vodka. At that point, I was drinking four-fifths a week. So to
And that,
consume
folks,
four,
can you clarify that is four-fifths of vodka, not four-fifths of a bottle,
no, no, no,
four-fifths
four,
of,
four bottles that were one-fifth
yeah.
of a gallon each. So the big tall bottles, I was drinking four of those a
Oh,
week. And it was not uncommon for me to drink half of that bottle in one session, which would lead me to blackout drinking. And I always drank shots. I never drank mixed drinks. And I was literally poisoning my body. I mean, I just had this general sense of feeling of unwellness. Like it wasn't a certain thing like, oh, I've got a headache or I've got a stomach ache, whatever. No, it was just I am generally
you
unwell.
just felt like shit.
Yeah, and I just felt lethargic and like looking in the mirror, I could see it, but the people around me didn't notice. And I was a functioning alcoholic, but the problem was I was only functioning at a fraction of what I was capable of, but nobody else could see it because I hid it so well.
Yeah,
I've had people tell me since the Broken Spoke has come out, and I don't mean to digress, but it's a relevant point here that they have known me for this whole time really well, like right beside me every single day. And they've said, Mike, I never had a clue you were drinking like that.
yeah,
And I'm like, I know nobody did because that's how well I kept it hid. And that's a lot of the addiction issue and this sexual abuse issue is the hiding, right? You hide it from everybody, you put on this smile, you look good on the outside, you're good on the inside. No, it doesn't work that way. It will
right.
for a little while, but then you got to get real. And so I got real. But going back to the biking, so when I first moved out here, one of the things that I really wanted to do was mountain biking. I had seen videos on YouTube and I really thought, no, that's the kind of biking I could really get into because I
Hmm.
wanted to ride, but it just didn't have the right environment. And so moved out here for one of the first things I bought was a mountain bike. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, this is the real deal. And I went out and I just kept learning and working my way up. And I was very fortunate to be mentored by a couple of guys who had mountain biked their whole lives. And they were actually from Northern California and they moved up here and they showed me the way. And then I was hooked, man. And then I rode with another guy that was literally half my age, and he had some mad skills. And I got busted up pretty good chasing him down the mountain, but it was
You got
fun,
busted up pretty good quite a few times, if I recall.
a couple times, yeah. But there again, I've kept it hidden really well because I've had people again reach out to me and they're like, dude, I remember when that happened to you. I didn't know you were that bad off physically. And I'm like, yeah, I kept it hidden. But that's what I do.
It's so interesting. So one of the things that I love the most about your journey as I have been a part of it for the last, I don't know, 4 years or so, is the difference of how you respond and open yourself up to the world. So we published this book just a month ago in June of 2024 as we're recording this.
On June,
And
by the
June
way, just
13th. Yeah, June 13th, 13, a lucky number. So, how do talk a little bit about how different you are as far as when you first started writing, journaling, and you were still there were probably what, a handful at best of people that even knew of anything of your background. And today, you fucking talk to strangers
Yeah.
about your life. And,
Yep.
you talk about going to the bakery, you go to the bakery, you go to the coffee shop. And so tell me
Yep.
a little bit about, in your mind, how are you feeling about that opening up and how different that is from 8 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I was guarded for so many decades, and it was a self-protection mode. And then I came to the realization, I was like, you've been through a lot of shit. You've had a really fucked up childhood. You had some challenges in your adult life. You fucking died in a bike crash and you came back. Okay, so there's a whole storyline there, right? What a shame it would be if I didn't share that.
Wow, that's amazing.
Like,
Yeah.
if I went through all that and I kept it for me, I didn't help others, dude, that's just selfish.
What is it that you say, give it away so you can keep it? Is
Yeah,
that the line? Yeah, yeah.
and that's exactly where that came from. It's not only the healing, but it's the cycling and like teaching the craft. Yeah, all of it.
It's just makes me so proud. And I love because I know where you have talked about where you were with the guilt and the shame, not even admitting it to yourself for many decades, and then certainly not. And now, so for the people, who are out there who may be watching or listening, having that same guilt, shame feeling, whatever your trauma is, whatever it is that you've gone through, this
And
is
alone. It's not
yeah,
just the guilt,
alone. Yeah,
it's
it's that
alone.
you're alone. Yeah. You are not alone. There
Yeah.
are, it's sadly many, the statistics are astounding at the amount of people and certainly men who have just not been talking about this. I mean, I think women have started to earlier talk about these
Yeah.
things, but men, it's still very much a stigma. So,
Well,
um,
and I think that was a turning point too when Tom, my therapist, shared with me, his statistics, which is 1 in 4 adult men
yeah,
uh, are survivors of childhood sexual abuse. That for me was a turning point that I was not alone.
yeah,
And then, you talk about probably, and I don't mean to stereotype, but probably the women have been a little more forthcoming. I think guys in general, and I've had a lot of guys tell me this since I've released the Broken Spoke, guys don't face their
no,
emotions.
right.
They just box it up, put it somewhere, and then move on. And that's not healthy.
Mm-mm.
You know, if you've lived a pristine life, sure, yeah, it probably works great. But if you've had to overcome adversity like I have and so many other people have, that's when you really need to face that emotion and, be real, and just address it and work through it.
Absolutely. I love it. So, Mike, what's next for you? So the book is published. What is your vision for the Broken Spoke legacy? What do you foresee? Oh, I know. That's a heavy one.
Yep.
I
Ah,
know you've
man.
talked to me about at some point, and I know this isn't realized yet, but about wanting to help kids who are in these situations where they're, feeling helpless or feeling like that they are alone. Is that a part of where you want to, where you see in your future?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I just need a moment.
Yep.
Yeah, impacting others, man, it's a huge responsibility. It's a huge privilege, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's what I'm doing.
You're doing it every day, just even just
Yeah,
talking to people. You almost like at least a couple times a week, you text me and you tell me, ran into somebody, some, stranger or somebody I haven't seen for a long
yeah,
time, and just telling them about my story. And, then they'll tell you something that
yep,
while they had no idea, or that, yes, they experienced something similar or something that
right.
they were, yeah, it's just, so I know that wherever you go with this, Mike, it's going to be fucking amazing and the possibilities.
It will. Yep. So the legacy, well, helping people. What I'd like to see in 5 years is like I don't know, a nonprofit organization or something like that, something along those lines where it gets kids on bikes and not just
That's
kids at
awesome.
risk, but Kids, because we live in a world where there's so much adversity and negativity and the social media and the screen time. And
Yeah,
there's good things about the screen time and social media,
sure.
but there's also bad things like, it just becomes overwhelming. And it's already been proven through the studies that too much screen time for a kid is not good.
Right.
So you get them on a bike, you get them doing anything physical. Again, it gets that endorphin dump, it gets them outside, it gets them off the screen, and it creates a healthier environment for them to move forward, not just mentally, but physically also, because
Yeah.
motion creates emotion. And that's going to help them grow and prosper in their lives.
I love it. That's a great vision. Now, do you think we can get everybody one of those orange Schwinn banana seat bikes that we had that you had back in the
That would be
in the
so awesome, but
70s?
I don't think they make those anymore.
Well,
And
you know what,
I
Schwinn, you need
actually,
if you don't, you need to bring them back, Schwinn. I'm talking to you here.
yeah, no doubt. That was the best bike of that era for sure. And it took me, I would say 5 years. I probably searched the internet looking for that
Yeah.
particular bike. And there's not many of them out there because most of the Schwinn Stingrays of that era, they've been modified. They've been chopped so
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they have like the long front end. And I mean, they're cool and everything, but I wanted the original nostalgic. And I'm so blessed I found this one. And it was actually here in the Pacific Northwest. And it still has the original tires on it.
Oh,
It's amazing.
wow. No
All
kidding.
original. Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
funny how for so many people, I think this is why your story intertwined with your biking journey is so relatable because I totally remember. And of course I had tricycles and the red tricycle that everybody had that
Yeah. Yeah.
yours got burned.
Which again was a Schwinn.
Was a Schwinn, right? But I do remember my first big girl bike, and it wasn't, I don't know if it was a Stingray, but it was pink. But I very distinctly
Yeah.
remember the feeling of having that first,
Yeah.
when I was probably, 7, 8,
Yeah.
8 years
Right.
old or something. So
But that sense of freedom, you
yeah,
were talking about that sense of freedom.
yeah,
I
oh
get
yeah.
that.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, especially us growing out. I mean, I think anywhere, but certainly growing up as we did out in the country, you
Yeah.
didn't you didn't get anywhere unless you either walked or you rode your
Yeah.
bike, or sometimes you took your parents' lawnmower to the store. But that's a whole other story. But so you're just wrapping it up. Your tagline in the book is "It never gets easy. You just get stronger." So what does that mean for you, Mike? What does that mean?
It's every day. Yesterday was the easy day. Today's the hard one. So let's get at it. It's like, is it easy being sober 9 years? For the most part, no. But, there's some moments where I can kind of let my guard down a little bit. But I also have to remember that I've got tomorrow to face and the day after. I got to get through today first, and there's going to be challenges and it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to be stronger because I'm stronger today than I was yesterday. I'm not as strong as I will be tomorrow, but that's all. You just got to keep moving forward and just know you're getting stronger every day.
100%. We need that. We need to get that on a logo and on a t-shirt and some mugs.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yep. Coffee mugs. Think about that every morning. You're drinking your coffee, and that's right there.
Oh,
You're putting that out
inspiration.
there, that karma. Yeah.
It is. Well, Mike, I so appreciate your talking with me today on my podcast and just being
Likewise.
so honest and sincere. And I've told you this a million times, but I'll tell you again, I love you so much, and I'm just so proud to have been a part of this journey with you. And I know it's just going to go amazing places. So thank you for what you've done and what you do, and where this will go.
Well, thank you as well. It's been an amazing journey with you, and we would not hear the world would not have the Broken Spoke if it were not for your work. I mean, we've talked about it a million times. That saying, "Hey, I did the work." No, I told the story. You did the work, and together we collaborated, and it's a beautiful thing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it has been great. So anybody who's listening out there, we do have a Facebook page. It is the Broken Spoke book. So just look up the Broken Spoke and you'll see us there. You can get in touch with us there. But again, thanks, Mike, for being here, and we will
Well,
catch you on the other side.
all right. Peace be with you.
everybody, thanks for stopping by Cafe Grit, where the Moxie is fresh, the passion cold brewed, and everything is served with a heaping side of mojo. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a rating or review on your favorite podcast streaming platform. I'll be forever grateful, and in return, I'll wish upon you copious amounts of bacon, your favorite hot beverage, and of course, pie. Cafe Grit is a production of Beth Campbell, LLC. Thanks again for stopping by, and remember, you do have grit. You are a fucking rock star, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Take it easy.